that would ultimately be filled by using my company's program. I was very good in front of large groups. I had a lot of practice at that. My other function on this trip was to host an extravagant hospitality bash in my hotel suite for several officials from large national unions. Had a lot of practice at that, too. By the time the limo arrived at the airport and the driver opened my door, I was buzzed. I handed the red cap $10 as he took my bags from the trunk. Even stoned, I had the robotics down. He asked to see my ticket and picture ID, and then he hit me with the standard security questions, to which I gave the standard passenger responses. Yes, I packed my own bags. No one known or unknown to me gave me anything to carry, and yes, they've been in my possession since I packed them. Then I headed into Terminal C. It made me recall a time before America worried about terrorists, when we could show up 20 minutes before a flight and not have to show ID or pass through metal detectors in order to board a plane. I was good for more than 20 trips a year, but this particular one had me thinking. It had me thinking a lot. As I took my first class seat aboard Continental's Flight 1679, it really began to sink in that it had been 21 years since I was in Las Vegas. Vegas. 21 years. Right down to the month. Throughout the nearly 5-hour flight, I opened my laptop and did some work, read a couple of magazines, drank 3 Bloody Marys, and socialized with the flight attendants, who used to be called stewardesses. I did anything to avoid thinking about Vegas. As the pilot brought the plane down low so we could see the Grand Canyon, it all started to come back to me. When we passed over Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam, I knew it was less than a half hour before I'd be hearing those high-pitched bells of the slot machines in the airport. Business would only keep me here for 3 days, so why did I make plans for 6? Because of family. My cousin and godfather, Gerald, better known as Jerry, along with his wife and mother, moved here about 3 years ago after almost 20 years in Palm Springs, and I wanted to spend some time with them. If there was anyone that I'd want to be with in Vegas, it would be with Jerry. As the plane circled, I looked out the window and saw a skyline and landscape that was dramatically different from the first time I was here on my own in late August of 1975. Back then, there was nothing. There were small patches of civilization here and there, but it was desolate until you actually got within a mile of the Strip. Now there are miles and miles of hotels, casinos, homes, highways, shopping centers, golf courses, and housing developments. There doesn't seem to be 1 square foot of unused property in this old desert oasis. Over the years, I had read the articles and seen the TV specials about how Las Vegas had grown and how it now resembled a family theme park with rides and circus acts for the kids, shops and pools for the moms, and casinos and hookers for the dads. But the allure of the decadence, of the wild nights with Frank, Dean, and Sammy, the rare Elvis and Howard Hughes sightings, the coolness, the glitz, the excitement, that was all gone. Inside, I never really cared about what the town had become because as far as I was concerned, I was never coming back here anyway. When the plane touched down, everyone applauded. I slowly shook my head and smiled. The applause triggered a flood of memories as the plane taxied to the terminal and the canopy approached us. This surely wasn't the same McCarran Airport I had flown into 22 times over 26 months during the mid-70s. It used to take 10 minutes to get through this airport. Now it took more than 30. But eventually I found my luggage and was in the Hertz van headed to my rented Lincoln. I checked into a $1,900 a night penthouse suite at the Mirage, and as soon as the bellman left, I picked up the phone to make the call. Jerry, I'm here. What you think, Juan? All these years, after all these years, he still called me Juan. It's changed since the last time you saw it, huh? He asked as I opened the remote-controlled curtains to look over the Strip. I let out a small, nervous laugh. Only Jerry knew what that laugh meant. Vegas for me, existed in a previous lifetime. It was October 1977. My last memory of this town was the morning two towering, well-dressed muscle men and their equally well-dressed boss, introduced to me simply as Mr. Smith, escorted me into a waiting limousine. As I slid into the rear seat, I saw another guy sitting there. He looked nervous and appeared to have been punched around a bit. He didn't speak when I nodded to him. He just turned and looked out the side window. Mr. Smith sat in the front with the driver. His men sat facing me and the other guy. No one was smiling. We only drove for about 15 or 20 minutes before we were surrounded by sand and brush. The car pulled off the paved road and continued on the sand for about a half a mile before stopping. The odd part was that the low skyline of the strip wasn't that far away. Mr. Smith got out and opened the passenger side rear door. The driver stayed in the car as Mr. Smith, his guys, the quiet passenger, and I stood in the morning sun. Mr. Smith looked directly at me and asked, "Any idea why I brought you out here?" I looked at the other guy. He started to weep. I looked at Mr. Smith and replied, "Nope, no idea." Mr. Smith pointed to the guy and said, "See this piece of shit? He tried scamming one of the casinos too." With that, one of Smith's men pulled out a pistol and shot the guy in the head. I jumped at the sound, then froze at the sight of the guy falling to the ground, motionless, with blood spurting from the hole in his skull. It all happened within a second. Mr. Smith, now flanked by the steroid twins, came close to me and pushed his finger deeper in my chest with each word as he told me to get your fucking ass out of Vegas and go back to Jersey on the next fucking plane. Because if you're not out of your room and out of Vegas by noon, your body will be in a fucking hole in this desert by tonight, and they'll never find you. And tell Casiano to keep Tommy Dolan, that Irish cocksucker, out of this town. How long did he think we were going to let you take our money? Now walk your guinea ass back to the hotel, pack your shit, and disappear. Then he signaled his men. One grabbed me from behind. The other punched me in the stomach. I collapsed against the limo and slid to the ground as Mr. Smith turned and slid into the back seat. His boys stared at me as if they were taking a mental picture, and then, one at a time, they followed their boss. The limo pulled away, leaving me in a cloud of dust and next to a dead guy. Now, Vegas is a place to bring your family. In front of my hotel, there was a man-made volcano with scheduled eruptions. Bugsy Siegel never would have believed this. Want to hear another chapter? Yes. Round two. It all started on Friday evening, August 28th, 1953, around 6:30. In a third-floor apartment at 727 25th Street in Union City, New Jersey, my 27-year-old father-to-be, Carmine Rocky D'Amore, was putting on his gold watch, diamond pinky ring, and a new suit as he prepared for his usual weekend job, handling security and collections at one of the numerous backroom casinos in Hudson and Bergen County that were run by Charlie Lucky Luciano's family. By day, he was recently elected shop steward for the Textile Workers Union of America's Local 2052, with its headquarters on Hudson Boulevard. His oldest brother, Dominic, better known as Gil, a business agent for the Pipe Fitters Union, got Rocky both jobs through his brother-in-law, Frank the Nike. Frank was the president of the Pipe Fitters Union, godfather to Gil's teenage son, Gerald, and head of Luciano's northern New Jersey region. At the time, Frank was in his mid-40s and was the stereotypical connected Italian of the 1950s and 60s. He stood no more than 5'6", weighed at least 250 pounds, usually had a cigar in his mouth, and was always impeccably dressed. Sometimes the cigar was lit, most of the time it wasn't. Frank never got his hands dirty, and he was always happy to do anything, not just for the family, but for our family. A little after Rocky finished dressing and was preparing to leave, his pregnant wife, Ann, felt something that she thought he'd like to know about. "Rocky, I think it's time." Now, Rocky had no problem breaking a guy's arm or leg when it was required. He probably had no problem putting a head to someone, putting a gun to some, putting a head. He probably had no problem putting a gun to someone's head and pulling the trigger if the situation called for that either. After all, by the time he was 21, he was a combat-hardened World War II sergeant. He even stayed in Germany as an MP for 2 years after the war. But the moment his wife was ready to give birth to me, his son, he froze. He immediately telephoned his brother's house a few blocks away. "Gil, she's ready to have the baby. What should I do?" "Take her to the hospital." "I can't. I'm too nervous to drive." "What if it happens in the car?" "Get over here and drive us. We'll meet you downstairs." He hung up, gathered Ann's things, and began to walk her down the 3 flights of stairs. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, a big, shiny, black Cadillac Fleetwood pulled up to the apartment house. Gil got out of the passenger door, laughing at his brother's fear. Rocky looked at the driver's seat to see the boss, Frank the Knight. Ann was escorted into the back seat, and her husband slid in next to her. During the ride, the conversation consisted of Rocky giving the directions to Margaret Haig Hospital in Jersey City and asking Frank to avoid the potholes and sharp turns. Gil was still laughing at his brother as he kept telling Ann to relax and that everything will be fine. Frank, on the other hand, kept telling Ann, "Don't you dare have that baby on my new leather seats." I wasn't born until 11:59 the following morning, 1 minute before noon on August 29th. As Rocky was pacing the floor of the waiting room, the doctor informed him of the birth of his son. My father said to Gil, who he had forced to stay throughout the night, I'm naming him John, after Pop." As my bassinet was rolled into the nursery, the first sets of eyes to see me through the glass belonged to my dad, Uncle Gil, Frank the Knight, my uncle's 16-year-old son Gerald, who a month later would be holding me over the baptismal as my godfather, and a face that I wouldn't formally be introduced to for another 23 years, yet hear the name many times, Rocco Casiano. Rocco was around 21 years old and a former boxer from Bayonne who found a more profitable career as Frank the Knight's right-hand man. I think enforcer would be a more appropriate title. He stood no taller than 5'7", with the typical face and body of a boxer and a voice that sounded like his larynx had taken a few good hits from 1950s two-time world boxing champion Carmen Basilio. He spoke very softly and had a jovial laugh. When Rocco was smiling or laughing, that was a good sign, because when he wasn't, people would start to disappear. It was Monday, September 7th, Labor Day, 1959. My mother was dressing me in a custom-made tuxedo. Jerry was getting married, and as his 6-year-old godson, I was given the honor to be the ring bearer. The reason it was taking place on a Monday was because Jerry and the rest of the guys, including my father, were busy making money over Labor Day weekend. It was that simple. You could say and think what you want about people connected with the mafia, but above all, they're simply men doing business just like those who make their way to the train station and eventually to the office. The fact that these guys usually drove to work around 2 in the afternoon in Caddies and Lincolns and ran their businesses from the back room of a local tavern or a garage instead of a corporate tower on Madison Avenue didn't mean that business was run any differently. No matter which way you look at it, it all comes down to the bottom line. And business is business. And a wedding takes second place to business. Jerry's wedding was a big day for the D'Amore family, and it was the biggest day in my life. Up to that point, anyway. When you're only 6 and dressed like all the big people as your favorite cousin is taking you around to tables where the ladies and the men are kissing the both of you, and you're the center of attention, you remember that kind of stuff. And I did. What I was too young to realize at the time was that I didn't look like I belonged with these people, much less be a part of their family. All these guys, my father, my uncle, my godfather, and nearly every other male there looked like your typical bunch of Italians. Dark skin, jet black or very dark brown hair and eyes. They were all impeccably dressed in suits and sporting their best jewelry. It wasn't hard to pick me out of this group. I had inherited my mother's looks. Her family came from northern Italy. So until I turned 9, I had blonde hair. Then it turned a very light brown. My eyes were baby blue and my skin was much lighter than everyone on my father's side. And I hated being dressed in that tuxedo. But on that day, Jerry and I formed a bond that many years later I would understand as family. Being in the wedding party was my official introduction to a different kind of life, one that I'd be a part of during the next 3.5 decades. Except for a couple of our cousins, the wedding party was made up of Jerry's closest associates. There were 2 guys in particular that I always remembered seeing around Uncle Gil's house. When I was very young, I'm sure I even thought they were also cousins because I never saw Jerry without them. Mike Caruso was one of them. He stood about 6 feet and always had a smile on his big rubbery face. Mike was fun to be around. He was constantly working on a scam or a hustle and could sweet talk his way through any confrontation or situation. And of course, he could break any limb on your body within a second's notice, especially if Jerry told him to. And then there was Taz, Tony Costa. To a 7 or a 70-year-old, Taz was a mountain in a man's body. Easily more than 6 feet tall, Taz was at least 240 pounds of pure muscle. He was, like the rest of the men a dark-skinned, dark-haired, and well-dressed Italian, and was to Jerry what Rocco was to Frank the Knight. Even Sinatra's bodyguard stepped aside when Taz wanted to say hello to old Blue Eyes. Taz couldn't go anywhere without being noticed. Taz and Mike were good guys to have on your side. Individually, Mike and Taz were intimidating. Together, their appearance and reputation were enough to get the job done. One of Jerry's favorite stories took place in the late 1960s when he sent his guys to collect money that was owed by a dock worker in Hoboken. Cosmo Manzi was more than a month behind on his loan payments, and after a few friendly attempts by Jerry to collect, Mike and Taz went to see him. The dock worker was waiting in the back of a parking garage expecting Jerry, and he planned to confront him with a large metal mallet. But as the 2 large bodies appeared, Manzi realized this was a fight he didn't have a chance of winning. The closer they got, the more he feared he was about to die. They stopped several feet away, and Mike asked, "Got Jerry's money, Cosmo?" He slowly shook his head and answered, "No." "Then we gotta hurt you," Taz said. Fear flooded the dock worker's face, and a pool of urine began forming at his feet. Taz approached from the left and Mike from the right. Manzi raised his hand and yelled, "Wait! Don't! Please! Let me do it. You guys will get carried away." Taz and Mike looked at one another. They didn't know what to expect. Manzi raised the mallet in his right hand, put his left hand against the wall, and smashed it. As all 3 men heard the bones crumble, Manzi fell to the ground and let out a piercing scream that echoed off the garage's concrete walls. "It ain't enough," Taz said as they took a step closer. Shocked, Manzi looked up, and with his good hand he again signaled them to wait. He took the mallet, raised it, and brought it down on his right knee. As his scream echoed as his kneecap shattered. He looked at Mike and Taz as tears ran down his face. Are they coming for me? I gotta go. There's my ride. I gotta go.
That was staged.
That was planned. Okay, gives me I get a little shaky when I do stuff like that. Okay, I got it. Okay. Again, his scream echoed as his kneecap shattered. He looked at Mike and Taz as tears ran down his face. They appeared temporarily appeased. Mike grinned and said, "A week from today, me and my friend are going to come to your house with a fruit basket. You'll give us an envelope with all the money you owe Jerry, plus all the vig. Okay, Cosmo?" Manzi couldn't muster a sound. He just nodded. "You won't let Jerry down again, will you?" Taz asked as he took another step closer. No, please, stop, please, no more, he whimpered. Taz looked down at him and said, "You beat the shit out of yourself and you're telling me to stop?" And he shook his head. "You dumb fuck." Mike and Taz turned and walked away, leaving Cosmo on the ground in pain, lying in his urine and crying. As they climbed into Mike's Buick, Taz turned to Mike and said, "Geez, I was just going to slap him around a little." "The dumb fuck," Mike added, and they drove away. Is that good, or you want a little bit more?
Keep it going.
Keep going, okay. At Jerry's wedding reception, which took place at the Chateau Renaissance in North Bergen, the media, the FBI, were taking pictures of everyone who walked through the front doors. What they needed a shot of my grandmother for, I'll never know. Sitting at Frank DeNike's table were the faces the FBI really wanted to see, but their attempts were futile. The reason they never saw these men was because they were driven to the kitchen entrance in the back of a customized delivery truck that had all the comforts of a living room assembled and bolted into it. The truck, painted with the logo Trojan Horse Catering, was kept... You got that, huh? A lot of people are like, "I don't get it." Okay. Was kept in one of Brother Moscato's many garages throughout Bayonne and Jersey City. It was used by Frank and his crew whenever they wanted to go somewhere without having their picture taken or their whereabouts unknown. The truck was backed up to the service entrance, the rear door would open, steps would come down, and the discreet occupants would simply walk into the affair through the kitchen. Their wives arrived to the reception by limo. By the spring of 1966, my father was a business agent for the union and making more money from both his day and weekend jobs. So we moved to a better community. Secaucus is a little town in the meadowlands of North Jersey, no more than 3 miles from Union City and still in Hudson County. It was unique in that it was only 10 minutes from the Lincoln Tunnel in Midtown Manhattan. Secaucus was the last refuge of the white middle and upper middle class in Hudson County and was increasingly becoming surrounded by progress and population. But for the boys from Hudson County, Secaucus was considered the suburbs. It's 1967. I was 14, a freshman at Weehawken High School, and had just started my first band after taking guitar lessons since I was 7. For the past 9 years, music had consumed my life. From the time I sat in front of a small, round-screened black and white television in 1958 and watched as my 9 to 13-year-old girl cousins went out of their minds for Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show, I knew this music thing was something I should be interested in. A few years later, the Beatles and the rest of the British invasion added rocket fuel to the fire. By the time I heard the Rascals, Hendrix, and Vanilla Fudge, I was hooked. Sure, I still played baseball and football with my friends, and I somehow managed to maintain a B average in school. But the rest of my time was taken with guitar lessons, practicing charts, copying chords and riffs from every possible 45 and album I could buy. Something personally important happened in my life when, in 1968, I bought Deep Purple's first album, Shades of Deep Purple. I was so impressed with the keyboardist, John Lord, and he spells his name Jon, that I immediately dropped the H from my first name. I also flipped at the picture of his long, thick hair and mustache, but not yet being able to grow a mustache, nor allowed to grow my hair over my collar, I opted for the spelling change, much to my father's anger in that I was showing disrespect toward his father. After practicing in my drummer's basement for several months, the band was ready to audition for our first gig. Besides the local church-run dances, the only other place to play in town or to perform was the Plaza Arena. The arena was a boxing ring during the week and a dance hall for the local kids on the weekends. The bands would actually set up and perform from the center of the ring to the 300 or so paying customers. I found out that the arena's owner was Al Nucci, a former boxer who owned a tailor shop in the center of Secaucus. What I didn't know was that 8 years earlier, he was the tailor who made the tuxedo I wore at Jerry's wedding, and he was a longtime friend of my father and Rocco Casiano. It was Saturday afternoon, March 23rd, 1968. The band was rehearsing and we thought the time was right. I called information and got the number of Al Nucci's custom tailor. The phone rang twice before a gruff male voice answered, "Hello, Nucci's." "I'd like to speak to Al Nucci, please." "Yeah, this is Al. Who's this?" I tried to make my 14-and-a-half-year-old voice sound older. "My name is John D'Amore, and I have a band called the Mixed Expressions. We'd like to play at the Plaza Arena." "Oh, yeah?" I heard him laugh. "Where have you played before, kid?" Silence. "We haven't. We're a new band, we're a new group, and all of us guys from Secaucus are from Secaucus and Weehawken. I used a sales pitch, and I'm sure we can fill it up with our friends." "Oh, yeah?" He laughed again. "What kind of music do you play?" "Everything they want to hear." "Not for nothing, but if you've never played anywhere before, how do I know you're any good?" Why don't you come down to where we rehearse? You can listen to us." "I don't have time. I'm busy. I cut him off. Listen to us right now." I placed the phone on a table, ran to my amp, counted to 4, and the band ran through the Temptations' "My Girl" and the Young Rascals version of Wilson Pickett's "In the Midnight Hour." When I returned to the phone, I was sure I'd be listening to a dial tone, but instead the voice on the other end said, "Listen, I gotta go measure Frank Sinatra for a suit. I ain't got time for this right now." I thought, Sinatra, yeah, sure. Little did I know how wrong I was. "What did you say your name was?" he asked. Oh, not he asked. "What did it say your name was?" he asked. "The Mixed Expressions." "No, not the band's name. What's your name?" John D'Amore." "D'Amore? You know a guy named Jerry?" "Jerry D'Amore? From Union City?" "Yeah." "Yeah, he's my cousin. Why?" "Then Rocky's your father?" "Yeah," I answered innocently. "Why didn't you tell me that?" "All right, I need a band for the arena in 3 weeks." He paused to look at a calendar. "Saturday, April 13th. Can you make it?" Not having any other bookings, the answer was easy. Yes! Okay, but be there at 4 o'clock to set up. You start at 20 after 8, play 3 40-minute sets, and be finished at 11. "Sure, no problem. How much are we getting paid?" $90. "And what's the name of the band?" "The Mixed Expressions." $90, but there's 6 of us. $90, that's it. He wrote down the name of the band. "See you in 3 weeks. If I gotta get hold of you, I'll tell your cousin." Then he hung up. That was my first encounter with Al Nucci. There would be many more over the next 5 decades. Thank you. We have a moderator here who was happy to get some questions going.
Yes, thank you. Great job, John. Terrific.
Very,
Wonderful
very
stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have a little Q&A session. If someone has a question, I could bring the microphone over and you could ask John the question. Sure.
I don't need a microphone for this. Just
Let the
real
county
quick.
guys talk now.
Yeah, I don't need a microphone. I think it's ironic, and some of the folks may or may not find it, that your experience with the recording business and how you heard the tapes and how you used your experience to get, was it Rocco?
Yeah.
Off, and then they had a big celebration in your honor. And you were telling the truth.
You know, if you tell them all this, they're not going to buy the book.
Well, there's no reason to buy the book. So I think it's ironic how that actually...
Yes, as you'll see in the story, one of the reasons that I become so close with the boss, who is at that point Rocco Casiano, is because of my years in the music business. See, there was a time, though fortunately I don't think anybody is so young, maybe one person here, 2 people here are so young, that before things were done digitally, we actually recorded on tape you know, tape that ran across tape recorder heads. And from my years in the music business and in recording studios, I was able to actually hear edits that took place that the state government tried to set the boss up with. And I heard that, and he liked me immensely. Please, more questions.
Any other questions? We can bring the microphone over. Anybody has anything else?
Well, this, I mean, I know I can speak
Okay.
dynamically. I mean, this is a true story, or it's partially, or
Does anyone here work for the federal government? You do?
Well, they were over there.
And what's being filmed? It's all bullshit. I'm sure that answered your question. Or as I've been told to say by my attorney, no comment. I take the fifth. I mean, I'll give you a list, Anybody, please, come on.
Unless you have a question?
Did you ever get down to Elizabeth and hang around with the farmers down there?
With the farmers down there? No. My experience in Elizabeth was only in, I'm sure you can verify this, but I guess at the southern end of Newark Airport, that is Elizabeth. It's right there, right? And the airport. I sometimes had to go, as you'll see in the book, I had to go meet some people down there sometimes, or I didn't. No, that's it. I just had to meet some people down there. I guess I met them and everything went okay because I'm here today, so it's a good thing.
And you're not under the oath?
And I'm not anywhere that could have floated up in the last 12 days. Okay, go ahead. Anybody, please? Come on. Yes, sir.
What made you want to write this?
I can actually answer that in great detail, actually. It was the first trip that I made to Las Vegas with my cousin Jerry in 1975. Right after it was the week of my 22nd birthday, that's why he brought me out there. And after being part of this scam that I didn't even really know I was a part of it for the first day or two, always being the creative type, and I was a musician, as you know, I remember everything about this. Now, if any of you went to Las Vegas back in 1975, and for those of you who weren't born by that period, but 1975, the MGM Grand was the largest casino and hotel in the world, or in Las Vegas, let's call it. And what made them famous was that their casino was famous for being 100 yards of game tables. The what do you call them? The one-armed bandits, the slot machines only went along the sides. There weren't banks of them. It just went along the sides, and the 100-yard long of just crap tables, blackjack tables, baccarat, roulette, that was what it was. And I remember walking along the edge of that with my godfather, and I was just so happy to be there with him. And we were walking along, and he was taller than me. Everybody's taller than me. So he was taller than me. So I looked up and I go, Jet, this will make a great book someday. And this guy who loved me for 22 years and 4 days, let's call it, at that point, who always had a gleam in his eye when he looked at me, stopped in his tracks and looked down at me with that look that just stays with you, and you know you just said something wrong. And he said, you can never tell this story until Casiano, Dolan, and me are dead. And that's all he needed to say. And the look on his face said that that's how he needed to say it. And I logged it in the back of my head. And I always knew I wanted to tell that story. And several months before Jerry passed away, when we were told he had a terminal illness, he had cancer, that's when I decided this story needs to be told now, and I started writing it. So I had to wait from 1975 to 1999 to start writing that story. So there you go. Yes, sir.
Your relationship with Toma.
Does anybody here remember a cop from Newark back in the late 60s and early 70s named Dave Toma?
Yeah.
They made a TV show about him. Tony Masanti played him. That's funny that you brought that up. Okay, this is absolutely true story. Got a cousin of mine back there who could verify this. Okay. My dad is part of a large Italian family. His mother had like 400 kids or something. But a very large. I come from a very large family. My dad's youngest sister, who is really only about 18 months older than my cousin Jerry, to give you an idea of how long my grandmother kept having kids, you know. And her youngest daughter was Pat, my dad's youngest sister. And she, at my christening, as I say that Jerry was my godfather, well, Pat was my godmother. But it was a very interesting dichotomy because on one side I had Jerry, and we all know what he did for a living, and Pat married a cop named Dave Toma of Newark, New Jersey, who by the late 60s had made a very big name for himself as a famous cop. Big enough so that ABC or one of the TV stations made a movie of the week, if you remember movie of the weeks back then, and then they made a TV series called Toma about a cop in Newark. So here I have on one side of me, my godparent, you know, is pretty, you know, lives a pretty unique life. And on the other side I have my godmother, whose husband is now an up-and-coming famous cop in Newark. So that's the relationship. But the funny thing is, and I think I know what these guys are talking about, is, you see, back in those good old days when I was hanging out with my cousin, when we would check into a hotel under a different name, because you didn't need a credit card back then, you could actually pay cash and stay in a hotel, we used Dave Toma. Anytime we were going someplace and we didn't want people to know where we were, who we were, we would check in under Dave Toma, and it was a very funny thing for us to do. That's that. Yes?
Is the book going to become a film?
Screenplay's been written, you know, we hope. You know, that's it. I mean, there's always this talk about, you know, somebody would like to do it, somebody would like to do it. For a while there was, you know, after The Departed came out, there was a little lull, you know, or actually a little peak, you know, of companies saying we'd like to do another mob movie and stuff. But the problem, at least that I'm dealing with this one, is that you're realizing this is what's called a period movie. It takes place in a specific time period, not today. It takes place pretty much in the 70s into the early 80s. And when you do something like that, especially if you want to do scenes of Las Vegas, you have to buy stock footage of the casinos. You have to get a casino or set up a set for a casino to look like 1975, 76 casinos, not what they look like now. Clothes, cars, and then, you know, you don't want to make it with Justin Bieber. You know, you want, but you don't want the standard Pacino, De Niro, Pesci crew in there, or the guys from The Sopranos, because, in all honesty, they come with that stigma. You see them and you think of that. So everybody's talking, you know, we've got to try to find out who the, you know, when we saw The Godfather for the first time, and I can only hope that this is as good as Casino, Goodfellas, anything like that, but when we all saw Godfather for the first time, that was really, for most of us, the first time that we saw Al Pacino. So we're hoping that we could find that next guy, the guy that in 30 years from now will be the next Al Pacino to play these parts and these parts now. But thank you for asking about the movie and stuff. Anything else? Anybody else?
Well, I just want to make a comment. Just you alluded to Carmen Basilio. He just died about 3 days ago. Do you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah, he died.
No kidding. Well, now I don't have to pay him a royalty. Good. All right. I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
This is probably a stupid question, but
No.
when you're in the mafia, do you live in fear a all the time?
I don't know. I was never in the mafia.
There's always the police after you, somebody else, there's all these people
If
out there.
only, you know, the police, yeah, I would, and realistically, it's not like the local cops. It would be state police, it would be FBI, okay? And, you know, I learned something important from my father one day, you know. There was a knock on the door, or somebody rang the bell, and I had just gotten back from Vegas, and I did happen to have a briefcase with some cash that I was returning to my cousin. And the doorbell rang, and I jumped and went to go, like, hide the suitcase. And my father taught me one very important question. He says, if they're going to come for you, they're not going to ring. Freeze! Okay. But you know, I think these guys worried more about each other than the police. They always, remember, you know, think about back in the 50s and 60s and stuff. If they got arrested, you always saw them. They walked in the police station, and 2 hours later they walked out. A lawyer got them out, something. They dealt with it. What we see now, they worry about, you get arrested. See, back then, like I said earlier, there was a code of honor. You know, if you got caught, if you had to go to jail, you went to jail. And when you got out, as long as you kept your mouth shut, your family was taken care of. When you got out, you had a job, you had some kind of income, you might have gotten, you know, as long as you kept. Nowadays, as you see, nobody keeps their mouth shut. They get arrested, they go on a witness protection program, and then you read in the paper 7 months later, 42 guys get arrested. Why? Well, because of this other guy that got arrested 7 months earlier. You know, that's what happens. So they worry more about themselves than getting caught doing something illegal. And again, we're talking about the 70s. It was a really different world. And as the book will tell you, I really think that I explain the demise of the mob. Because for those of you who might have grown up and remembered the, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s, it was so different than what it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It really was. It was a different group of men. And especially what they are now. I really believe that they had their really good run, I guess, from the 1920s to the 1970s. And after that, the guys who didn't want their kids in this sent them to law school, sent them to business school for legitimate lives. And then the guys who didn't know any better, their kids became hoods. And they didn't run it with the same rules and ethics that were run a generation or two earlier, and it has become what it has become. And personally, you know, my father taught me something. When I grew up in Union City as a kid, and somewhere around when I was 5 or 6 years old, I guess somewhere around 1958, 59, I don't know if anybody here can recall that, maybe if you remember from Hudson County, there all of a sudden became a new influx. The Cubans came from Cuba right after Batista fell, and they came to Hudson County. And a lot of my friends had disparaging things to say about them. And my father taught me something early on. He says, you don't be disparaging against anyone, because 50 years ago, that was us. And they're just looking to find a home and make a place for themselves and make, you know, find a new place. And that was the Italians 50, 60 years earlier. And 40 or 50 years earlier than that, it was the Irish. And 40 or 50 years before that, it was the Germans. And that's why the state is full of everybody, because we all came here and we all carved out our little niche, but we all had to get here first. So I believe that with the demise of the mafia as we know it from the Italians, the Russian mafia has really taken its place now. And the sad part, you know, they don't play by the same rules. These people will kill you, they will kill your family, and they will do it in your neighborhood. It's different than it was back then. Fine, there you go. There you go. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Great job.
I'm going to sit right over there and sign your books. Appreciate
Good job, man. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, do we have the two WCTC contest winners here who won the free copies? Okay, come on up. I got your copies up here.
Thank you, I'll be right there.
Here's your hand.
He's in this.
All right.
Very good book.
Thank you very, very much.
I'm still.
You got it. Well, you heard half of it already, I mean, you should charge them half.
Thing is, I also know from the area that you grew up doing the time period that you told me.
Thank you, have a great day.
You too.
I know.
For you? You.
I always think that when I was little, I'd say how nervous you get when someone's getting near finding you, and I think, how do these guys that everybody's after, how do they live like that? It must be hell. It wasn't fun.
I don't think,
Quite a
I knew
job.
a lot of these guys who just always looked over their
Quite a
shoulder.
joke. Those are big ones, right?
That's right.
But I always go into restaurants and sit with my, you know, so that I'm facing the door
Back to the wall.
after the mafia, and I don't know why.
I don't think I'll live long enough. I want to inherit this maybe someday.
This
Christmas,
man
that's me,
absolutely, yes, I
yeah.
know, this man absolutely personalized his book.
Yeah, this way he knows almost. That's why I had it from before.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I was here Monday. I think it was good to get a nice uniform.
Thanks. Yes, absolutely. Actually, everybody, hey guys, here it comes.
Nice,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Like I'm at the bar.
There you go.
So, that was
John, that was one of our contest winners.
Yes.
And there's a giveaway for Broadway tickets for WCTC. That's on the
Very,
table
very
right
much.
behind John.
Yeah, reach out. Good to meet you.
Thank you. Was it, were you in the mob too?
No, but I was born and raised in Jersey City.
Marvin Gaye?
Yes. He was the mother.
No, she was the mother of the mayor.
Right.
Let's go out, name it after my mom, the mayor.
You have to use my credit card. This guy's very interesting.
Not only was this guy, okay? And then, here's a better. Then in 1972, he got convicted of petty possession with corruption. Went to jail for 18 months. While he was gone, they made his wife a mayor. This is better. He comes out of jail after 18 months. He takes over as mayor, and then he gets elected to the
I'll wait.
state senate. That's what he got.
Right? Except Joyce.
I want the hard back.
There you go. There you go.
But I get something real.
Chance to win here.
Oh, sure.
I didn't realize who you were. They said you were a company. Oh, thank you.
Yes, I have.
Anyway.
I'm not a slave to fashion. I've heard the name, you know, that women pay stupid money to own.
You say it like it is.
I have to say, I
the publishers and I got letters. I have letters. My attorney has letters. 2 files. We laugh at it. One file is this way, Mr. Famous, thank you very much for submitting your clients, blah, 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 blah. It is our professional opinion, it is our professional opinion that at this time there is a glut in the marketplace of coffee books and this could get lost in the mix. Okay, so that's that. That's that part. Then we open up the other file. Dear Mr. Famous, thank you very much for submitting your client's manuscript. Very interesting read, very nice story. But it is in our professional opinion that the mafia genre is dying. And so here I have too many, here I have nobody gives a shit. All I know is that
Maybe one wants to be enough of a demographic to be interested.
Well, you're born 53, right? So like 9 years old. So I don't know.
thank you, very, very good. Very hard to make it. Okay, you're proud of
Are you living in LA area?
Yes.
Not if I can be out there or yeah, my oldest son went to South Texas or Masters. I used to get there all the time.
You're saying I'm 36 days older than you are.
Oh, I am. October or something? Oh, older.
Older.
I smoked a lot of weed. You ever talked to her or not?
All different things.
Give it to Jason.
Seen a lot so far. You see all our parents. See a lot.
Give it to Jason.
Grandkids.
And where's Sean? Sean? That's a meter? I'm worried about the meter. Yeah, but you got here, it's 2 hours of going down. I got quarters, I got quarters. Here, give it to the guy. It's about 6 o'clock. No more.
I get up there at 7.
No.
Oh, she was gonna meet me there.
We are going to see.
You got locked up, right?
No, you don't know who the mayor is? Mike Ganelli.
They're very good.
You Mike Ganelli, they graduated.
Seen him a few times.
They are, but they sell out. They sell it out. I have no idea.